Hello and welcome. Fish Police, written and illustrated by Steve Moncuse, was a 26-issue series published between 1985 and 1990. It began as a self-published black and white series. Then it moved to Comico, where it transitioned to color for 10 issues. Once Comico was bankrupt, it was picked up by Apple Comics, where it returned to black and white until it ended. So it had a somewhat convoluted publishing journey. However, Moncuse managed to keep the narrative flowing smoothly from publisher to publisher. The final result is one complete, unique story that ends on its own terms. Let's get into it. Despite the series beginning a few years before this one-shot special, it might be best to read it before the ongoing series. In fact, it's kind of essential to the overall story. Although, to be honest, it can be skipped because the major element it explores is slowly revealed in the ongoing series. The special puts that element front and center. It establishes there is something very weird about the lead character, Inspector Gill. If you'd rather there was some mystery, then skip the special entirely. But if you want a sense of what the series explores, then I would suggest it. It's up to you and your preference. Now, it's best if I throw a spoiler warning here, even though what I'm about to talk about was not something that was kept a secret. Still, just to be safe, skip ahead if you'd rather not know. The major element is that Inspector Gill is a self-insert of the creator, Steve Moncuse. Again, this isn't a big spoiler, because Moncuse was open about it. While it's not immediately obvious who Gill might turn out to be, it becomes rather clear over time, or if you read any of the editorial material. Although, it's probably more accurate to say Moncuse inserted himself and then removed the awareness that he's a character in a story he's writing and drawing. That's seen in the special and at various points during the series. Gill makes comments that are out of place and out of context in this fish environment. The special focuses on Gill's first appearance in Fish City. From a reader's point of view, it seems like Gill is having a mental episode where he's questioning reality itself. He can't rationalize pouring beer underwater or having a staircase when fish can swim. Or for that matter, having 3 fingers and being able to walk upright without legs. It's these little touches that make no sense to him. Over a short amount of time, this self-awareness fades, and Gill accepts that he's always been a fish and this is his life. The special also gives the origin of Brack, who goes from having a minor role to being a major antagonist late in the series. And this origin adds some context to the role he eventually assumes. It should be mentioned, all of this is done for comedic purposes. It's not like an existential examination of a personality breakdown, because, ultimately, Gill is just making a transition from being a real person into being a real fictional character. The story leans into the absurdity of being about fish people in a fish city. It doesn't take itself seriously. The series opens with the 4-issue storyline, Hairballs. We are introduced to Inspector Gill, who comes home to find Angelfish in his apartment. She's there to get help to extract her uncle, Calamari, from the evil squid organization. Under duress, Calamari has been developing a street drug called Hairballs. This drug allows its users to live in a universe where people walk on 2 legs. Intrigued by this idea, Gill agrees to help. At work, as a member of the Fish Police, Gill tries to dig up more information on Angelfish. He learns she is the sister of his love interest, Goldie. Later, while Gill is waiting to meet Calamari, he's approached by the reporter, Oscar, who warns him this meeting is not what it seems. When Calamari arrives, he agrees to disclose information about Hairballs if Gill arranges a meeting with Goldie. We also learn Goldie is far more than a receptionist for the Fish Police. She's actually an agent of Squid. The first issue ends with Angelfish meeting with the leader of Squid, the nefarious Hook. Overall, this has been a convoluted scheme to recruit Gill into becoming a Squid agent. There's definitely a comedic, noir atmosphere to the opening arc. It seems that every character has their own agenda, and Gill is the person in the middle, trying to figure out the truth in all the lies he's being told. But Gill is a pretty average, beer-drinking guy who isn't the deepest thinker. He's easily led on and distracted. He's also less of a police officer and more of a private detective with a day job and a badge. Moncuse has a storytelling quirk that appears between the first and second issue. At the end of the first issue, Goldie is set up to meet with Calamari, who intends to abduct her and hand her over to Squid. The story skips from the setup to Goldie being held captive. At first, it reads like you missed an issue, but this is a method Moncuse will use from time to time. He'll skip over a sequence that he seems to be building up and jumps to the aftermath. Anyway, Gil is lured into Squid, shown a lavish lifestyle, and given a sword he names Suds Guzzler. He also meets an adversary named Brack, who will play an important role later on. However, to become a full member of Squid, Gil must murder both Goldie and Angelfish. Naturally, Gil refuses. It should be noted that Hook and Gil look similar. That might be something to file away for a later time. Here the story skips forward again, with Gil at home, released from Squid custody, as is Goldie and Angelfish. This leads to the next storyline, Sharkbait, which introduces the organization, Shark. Okay, to put all of this into perspective, the Fish Police are the police force of Fish City. It's run like a typical police station, like you see on TV, although it's more Barney Miller than Hill Street Blues. Squid is an evil organization, led by a James Bond type of villain, Hook. They live in a heavily guarded compound on the outskirts of Fish City. Finally, there's Shark, which is somewhat similar to a slightly religious FBI type of department led by Lord Tetra. So the Fish Police are situated between these two opposing factions, Squid and Shark, both of whom seem to have an intense interest in Gil. In many ways, a good portion of the series is both sides trying to convince Gil to join them. Shark wants to influence Gil to defeat evil and restore peace. Squid and its leader, Hook, want to coerce Gil into doing something nefarious and out of character. Overall, there's the heavy implication that Gil has a destiny to complete, and both groups want him on their side. After Sharkbait, this destiny becomes even more apparent as Gil leaves the city to get away from all the chaos. There he meets a group known as Reefers, who treat him like a prophesized savior. To strengthen that connection, Gil will eventually lead them back to the Promised Land, Fish City, where they will take part in a revolution that secures their future. All the while, Oscar, Hook, and the Reefer, Ray, all appear to have insider knowledge into who and what Gil might be. They discuss how events seem to be changing, with Gil and other characters not acting as anticipated. The story they thought they were part of, so to speak, is far more fluid than they expected. Gil makes sudden choices that affect everyone around him, but he seems completely oblivious to his power and influence. None of them outright state they know their characters in a comic book, but they do know there is a morality play going on, and they all have their place within it. However, as the series nears the end, Gil does recognize the power he controls. He does know he can change reality. He achieves a certain level of self-awareness, and that dramatically alters the course of life in Fish City. According to Moncuse, the inspiration for Fish Police was a sketch on the Canadian TV show SCTV. In that sketch, there was a group of police who patrolled fish markets, so they were the Fish Police. That inspired Moncuse to create a number of literal fish characters who worked for an underwater police department. Moncuse based the look of Gil on the character of Mick Belker from the TV show Hill Street Blues, and the recurring character, Goldie, was based on Lonnie Anderson from WKRP. It has to be acknowledged, there's one character that stands out as a gay, effeminate stereotype, although it is revealed much later that they are, to use modern terms, non-binary. They identify as both male and female. Additionally, there is some casual, "hey, that's not my thing" style of mild phobia that pops up every now and again. It's not tedious or prevalent, but it will stand out to a modern audience. That said, the non-binary character is developed and has some sympathetic, relatable moments. So there is some nuance to what could have been a slightly offensive, very 80s stereotype. Curiously, Moncuse produced artwork that he decided not to use for the original first issue. Those pages would become an unofficial Fish Police number 0 and be published as backup material in the final issues of the Apple series. Parts of that discarded first issue would be used for the 5th issue. As difficult as this may be to believe, Fish Police shares a great similarity to The Crow and Crossover. All three were inspired by an actual, traumatic event that led the creator to explore a world where they controlled the outcome. Unlike the other two works, Fish Police doesn't reveal the underlying trauma that led to an escape from reality. All that's reasonable to say is Moncuse was going through a difficult period, and the Fish Police was his way of coping. He created a small, manageable world with characters that welcomed him into their environment. Once again, I have to add a spoiler warning to talk about the finale. The ending itself could be compared to the ending of Grant Morrison's Animal Man run. In fact, both were published in late 1990. However, both Morrison and Moncuse had been building up their respective finales for some time, so the similar plot beats is coincidental. Not to mention, they are approached very differently with different results. In Animal Man, Morrison is cruel to Buddy Baker just to illustrate and flex the power they have over the character. It's done for cheap entertainment. In the end, Morrison gives Buddy everything back because, well, despite having total control of that issue, Morrison doesn't control the character. Buddy has to be reset for the new writer taking over. In Fish Police, a certain ennui settles into Fish City. Gil becomes a benevolent dictator, like a beer-drinking Dr. Doom, and everything becomes too settled, too ordered, too perfect. Realizing he's actually Steve Moncuse, Gil resets the series. He brings back everyone who sacrificed themselves for the story and repeats the first issue with a different authorial perspective. Then, without ceremony, Moncuse leaves. Literally, it happens between the space of one panel and the next. Gil returns as a distinct character, free from his guidance. The ending is sad, but not melancholy. It is uplifting without being saccharine. And ultimately, it is a very fitting end for a creator who genuinely adores his creation. And most importantly, he believes in them. The kindness is palpable. What's interesting is the idea that certain characters, such as Hook, Calamari, and Angelfish, were there to corrupt or influence Gil to take actions he normally wouldn't pursue. These characters specifically tried to get the writer to do something outside his own moral center. But he resisted, despite, as a character, having all the incentive to carry out revenge and walk a darker path. Even though this was a fictional realm, the characters felt real to Moncuse, and treating them like cheap, disposable bits of entertainment ran against his actual morals. They were more than just two-dimensional dolls for him to manipulate so he could move the plot forward. There were consequences. There was real suffering. The ending slightly epitomizes the saying, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. By the end, Gil looks and acts like the original antagonist, Hook, thus the reason they have a similar appearance. Although Gil is less serious than Hook, but oddly, even more controlling. By resetting the series and leaving, Moncuse as Gil becomes the hero again, instead of fully transforming into the villain. It's a very moral choice. For a series that was slapstick at times, and very light most other times, there is a deeply serious message under the surface. As some may know, Fish Police was adapted as an animated series in 1992. CBS clearly bet a lot on Fish Police. They hired some exceptional voice talent, such as John Ritter, Ed Asner, Tim Mother-Loving Curry, Megan Mullally, and Robert Guillaume, to name just a few. But the overwhelming presence of The Simpsons destroyed the series almost immediately. 6 episodes were produced, but only 3 aired. It was killed quietly and very quickly. If you so desire, the Internet Archive has all 6 episodes available. But unless you're highly nostalgic for failed animated series, it might be best to avoid it. The only resemblance to the comic book is the title and the anthropomorphic fish characters. Otherwise, it's a litany of terrible fish puns. It comes out swinging hard, and wow, it misses every single blow. Really, I felt secondhand embarrassment for Steve Moncuse. Moving on. At a glance, the continuity of the series can be a bit confusing. There's the Fishwrap series, a Marvel miniseries, the Comico run, and Apple Comics. So to understand the continuity, I made this graphic. As you can see, Comico reprinted the first 4 issues in color as a standalone graphic novel, Hairballs. From there, the first Comico issue is number 5. 1 through 4 only exist as the graphic novel. Issues 5, 6, and 7 are color reprints. The first issue of new material for Comico is number 8. The Marvel series is similar. For the record, some language was toned down, but otherwise, it's color reprints of the first 6 issues. So you can mix and match for the first 7 issues. As far as I can tell, there's no difference between the 3 versions, except, of course, some language editing in the Marvel series. After that, issues 8 through 17 were published by Comico, and then issues 18 to 26 were published by Apple, none of which were reprinted. There was also a spin-off series, Fish Sticks, that was published after Fish Police ended. That series is not material essential to the overall saga. It's an issue-length version of the backup feature that ran in the comic during the Comico run, which bears a lot of similarity to Munden's Bar from Grimjack. The short, amusing stories are written by Moncuse and illustrated by a variety of other guest artists. Honestly, I just flipped through it to get a sense of it. After the main saga ended, it kinda felt weird returning to the series. But that's me. Your results may differ. In 2010, IDW reprinted the first 4 issues. From what I can tell, the rest of the story was not reprinted. I don't know why, but I'd presume sales were not spectacular for a cult status series from the 80s. As for Moncuse himself, he did some inking jobs for Marvel in the early 90s, after which he got out of the comic business entirely and got a real job as a grade school teacher. Also in 2010, when IDW was about to release the Hairballs collection, Moncuse gave an interview where he suggested he might produce a new Fish Police story, looking at how the characters developed 20 years later. However, that series never appeared. The Fish Police did make a brief appearance in 2013, within the pages of the relaunched color version of Dark Horse Presents. And, as far as I can tell, that silent prehistoric piece was the final time the characters appeared. In the end, the story may be over, but Fish City will continue on, existing when necessary. It will always be there in some capacity, should Moncuse ever decide to visit. He lived with them and saw them develop as they challenged and entertained him over a 5-year period. They didn't stop existing because he stopped writing and drawing the story. They have an ongoing life, even if the exact circumstances are never publicly revealed or witnessed. Much like all of us in the audience. We exist and carry on after the story ends, even if no one sees what we do. Thank you for watching. You know, I thought this video would be about 10 minutes long, and I'd bang it out in about a week. But the more I looked into it, the longer the script got. So I went with it and decided, you know what, why don't I do the most complete version I can produce? After all, there are no videos that cover Fish Police in depth, and maybe that should be corrected. Considering its cult status, it's quite likely views will be sparse on this one. But sometimes you have to follow that muse, worry about the recommendation algorithm, well, never, and just talk about stuff that's pretty interesting. So that's what I did. You know, that's my thing. Anyway, I hope it was interesting. Now it's time to thank some people. Extra special thanks to Chapel Pluto, John Woolham, Plutocracy, Spencer Estes, Green Man, Constant Disappointment Records, Jeff Nicholson, Sickin, Francis De La Cruz, Russell Bull, John Nyukes, Andrew Barton, Odin Ashcroft, Ruby St. Dennis, Phil Sagan, Edward Clayton Andrew, Corey Drew, Brian Deaton, Tom Granis, John Gaunt, James Graham, and Matt Marino. You were all justified and ancient.